Good morning. It is Brent with Lykins Motorsports. We are continuing on with our 427 medium riser build for the Shelby Cobra replica this morning. First off, I'm going to start with getting the oil pump on. This is a Melling M57 high volume. I generally either use these or the B pump. The B pumps I generally save for higher RPM, higher end engines where you're kind of trying to sneak out every last horsepower. The standard volume pumps do make just a little bit more horsepower, so that's something to keep in mind. But we're using an ARP shaft drive, and what I typically do is I use studs to slide my gasket down over and the pump and everything, and that just keeps everything in alignment. Some guys put the pump on with the shaft and the bolts through it and the gasket on it all at the same time. That's perfectly fine if you're comfortable with doing that. I've always been a little bit more careful. I guess I have a little OCD about this stuff, but I use the studs, and then I come back and put my bolts in like that. So I'm going to do that, and then we're going to use this Canton oil pan and pickup combination. I'm going to remove this tray out of here so I can make sure it's all clean inside. Canton really just doesn't do a good job about cleaning stuff. Moroso, I'm not too big of a fan either. I mean, out of the box, they're not bagged, and they're just filthy dirty. Maladon seems to be the cleanest that I've ran across. They're bagged and they're cleaned, and when you open them up, they're almost spotless. But that needs to be cleaned out, and then we can get our pickup on, and our oil pan gasket, and our oil pan. So let's get started on that. All right, everything has been washed and bolted up, red Loctite on everything. A couple things to watch out for. I've seen some pickups come in where they were made backwards or whatever, and this flange lip is supposed to cover this cut plug. This is the where your relief spring and everything lives. So in the event that this cut plug walked out, you could lose oil pressure. So you want to make sure that your flange covers that plug so that it doesn't back out. You want to make sure that your pump drive will not fall out of the pump. At any point, you should have like a little tooth washer that slides on the pump shaft that will keep it from falling out when you pull the distributor out. So you need to make sure everything functions well with that. And at this point, you can check, we'll get our gasket on and check our pickup to pan clearance. So we'll do that next. All right, so got our flanges all cleaned off the block. Block flanges cleaned off. I prefer quart gaskets, and depending on, this is probably just habit. So I take a razor blade and cut around the bolts on the rear cap. On different blocks, how the fasteners interact, bolts, studs, whatever, you may get some interference. So just a habit, I cut around those. When you're measuring for pickup clearance, take a straight edge, lay it across the pickup, and measure from the gasket surface up to the bottom of the straight edge, and then you come across and measure from down in the pan to the bottom of the straight edge. I've got about 7/16 clearance, and that's a sweet spot for these high volume pumps. These pickups, aftermarket pickups, are generally like a 5/8 tube. So if you get it too close to the pan, sometimes you can starve the oil system dry. So somewhere, 7/16 is usually a good spot. 1/2 inch, I've even run some 5/8 clearance and not had any problems. But now we are looking at the task of cleaning this Canton oil pan up. I'm gonna get rid of the, well, if I find the right Allen wrench, we'll take these 4 tray screws out and make sure everything's nice and clean. Then we'll get our bolts lined up. I think FE uses 22 bolts, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. So you need to have all those lined up. Test fit your oil pan, make sure all your holes line up, and then we'll get a little bit further here, and then I'll show you how I put the oil pan gasket on. We put our tray off, and this is a road race pan, so it's got the oil control doors. So it's kind of like almost like a check valve. It lets oil go one way and not the other. It keeps the pickup submerged in oil, which is good. I've been cleaning on this pan for a little bit. Just not a fan of filthy oil pans, but about ready to get it put back together. Here's the fasteners that came with it. They were not tight, but we'll put some more red Loctite on them and cinch them down really good. All right, so we're getting ready to put our pan on. This is the last time that you can go over things before the pan goes on. So just take a few minutes and double check everything. I am OCD. I went over all the rod bolts again. Pickup bolts, oil pump bolts. Everything is clean. I have my gasket laid out. There are 20 bolts, not 22. I just got all those ready. And they're 5/16, 18. And I put lock washers on them. So what I do, very thin layer of silicone around, then I put my gasket down, and then a thin layer on top of that, and then the oil pan goes on. Whoops, sorry. You don't want any beads here, just a very thin layer. Some guys use gasket cinch, some use RTV. Just use whatever you're comfortable with. Anything that just keeps the gasket in place and seals up any imperfections anywhere. I use Dow Corning 732. It has always been FE proof for me, and I use it everywhere on the engine. So same deal here, just a very thin layer on top of the gasket. Tripod's in the way. All right, now we can put our oil pan on. And from here, it's just putting in all 20 bolts and tightening those up. All right, so with the engine upright and oil pan on, I can put the lifters in. These are Morel standard travel hydraulic roller lifters. You do not soak these in oil. You just wipe oil around the outside body of them and slide them in. These operate off of a specific lifter bore clearance, and this block has been honed to meet that clearance. So we'll get those slid in right now. Lifters are in, and went ahead and cleaned off our deck surface. We're going with these Felpro 1020s. They're 40 thousandths thick. This is going to give us about a 43, 44 piston head clearance. And front, it's nice that they're labeled, but you always go back here and check that this hole is open at the rear. A lot of the times you have to flip gaskets over. So, you know, the other side looked like this, but in order for this to be on the front, you got to flip it over. So there again, hole in the back, front, looks a little bit different. It's okay, that's how it's meant to be. And now we can start getting our heads on. All right, so we are right here. Our heads are torqued and on. And for this build, we're using some Lykins Motorsports non-adjustable roller rockers. If you haven't seen these before, they are 1:7:6 ratio. They have a bushed fulcrum and a roller tip. They use a cup pushrod seat. So you can use just a standard 5/16 end pushrod. So you can order small block Ford pushrods or small block Chevy or whatever is on the shelf, instead of having to go to a special 3/8 ball or a cup or something like that. So you'll save a little bit of money on your push rods. Since they are non-adjustable, you have to measure accurately for push rod length, and we're going to do that now. I get a lot of emails saying, can you go over this again? So I want to do it on camera. But you need, the heads need to be on with the head gasket that you're going to use, the thickness and everything. Lifters that you're going to use, and basically you just roll the engine over until, so I use the Evo method of running the valves, and you need to do that when you're measuring for push rods too, to make sure that the lifter is on the heel of the lobe. So on an FE, the first one you come to is exhaust, and this is intake. So the Evo method says you set the intake when the exhaust valve is opening, you set the exhaust valve when the intake valve is closing. So we're going to roll this engine over until that intake lifter starts to go down. And then we're going to grab our push rod length checker. We're going to tighten the nuts down on the stands so that they don't move, and you're basically going to just find the distance from point A to point B. And I recommend using a push rod length checker from the company that you're going to buy your push rods for, because the balls have different radii and everything on them. So that'll give you a more accurate measurement. But once you find your length, then you can add, I usually run 50 to 60 thousandths of preload on these Morel hydraulic lifters. So you get your distance, you add that amount to it, and then you order your push rods. Before you get started, I would recommend just making just a list of how the engine goes. So 1 exhaust, 1 intake, 2 exhaust, 2 intake, and then the head is symmetrical about the middle. So 3 intake, 3 exhaust, 4 intake, 4 exhaust. Then we go to the other side, 5 exhaust, 5 intake, 6 exhaust, 6 intake, 7 intake, 7 exhaust, 8 intake, 8 exhaust. So we'll just record each dimension and I'll show you how to do that. All right, so I went to measure pushrod length and I can't find the length checker that I normally use. It's an 8 to 8 to 9 to 8 on these engines. And I don't know if I lent it out or what. So I had to order another one, be here tomorrow. So we may do a separate video on how to check for pushrod length. But for right now, we can see what our intake manifold needs, and we can check it out and see if the flanges need milled or anything like that. All right, this is the intake that we're going to use. It is a Ford, factory Ford Sidewinder intake. You can tell that carb center line is closer to that side. Real nice piece. They make decent horsepower. They are period correct for our 427 Cobra. And this one appears to be in really good shape. None of the holes are stripped or anything like that. So I'm going to flip this over on its side. We're going to use our BHJ fixture and make sure that the flanges are straight and square and true. And then we'll mock it up on our engine to see how it fits. I'm using some Mr. Gasket 202As for medium risers, and I have those mocked up. I did try the engine. Better not leave that in there. I did try the intake on there without the gaskets, and it's set way too low, so apparently it has been cut before. But SCE makes a really nice medium riser gasket as well. I currently do not have any of those here that cover the exhaust crossover. So I'll tell a little bit of a story on myself. I actually tore an engine down because it was apparently smoking so bad out of the breathers that I thought I had just totally screwed something up. But I actually ordered new pistons, new rings, and all on my dime because I thought I messed something up. But what it was the exhaust crossover right here. I was using a gasket that just barely left a little bit of a corner open. So what was happening was, under combustion and the exhaust stroke, it was pushing exhaust gas out of that hole in between the intake manifold and the head through a little gap, and up through the valve covers and out the breathers. And this thing would smoke like a freight train under dyno load. And that's just one of those lessons that you learn, and experience over the years will tell you that you've made some stupid mistakes and you never make them again. So I'm not making that mistake again. I have my hole covered, and we're gonna look at this intake manifold. Okay, so BHJ makes some Ford manifold fixtures, and it basically is machined to the correct angle, and you can use it to make sure that you don't have any gaps, that there's no daylight showing underneath, and that everything is nice and straight. You can check it at multiple points, and everything looks fantastic. And what we'll do is, after I check it with the gaskets on there, I'll pull the gaskets off and set the intake down with nothing on there, so we can eyeball the angles and everything and see how everything mates up that way without a gasket to get in the way. All right, so one thing that we can check, I've got this on there, and I can see light under that side. I do not see light under this side, so that tells me we have just a little bit of a mismatch somewhere. And a little bit is okay, but on an FE, you want everything to be perfect. I want to see how the ports line up and everything lines up on the engine, and then that'll give me a little bit more data to make a judgment call on whether we need to maybe make a pass on this and trim it up. All right, I've got my bore scope out, and I know this is hard to see, guys, but the port roof of the intake matches the port roof of the head. So the intake sits pretty close to the way that it needs to sit, but I think just for safety's sake, I'm gonna have the flanges just trued up, and with no real amount taken off. I think it'll just take maybe less than 10 thousandths to clean it up, but I don't want to take any chances. And the reason why, after I bounce my borescope off the floor multiple times, the reason is because on an FE, the intake gaskets are exposed to oil. So you have just oil, draining down here. If you have any little spot where the engine is pulling vacuum, it'll suck oil into the ports. So we don't want to do that, and I just want to make sure that's right. So we'll pull the intake off, and I'll have my machinist check it out real quick. So I do believe that's probably about our stopping point until tomorrow when the pushrod length checker comes in, and I hope to get that all measured up. And tomorrow's Friday, I think, yeah. So I can get push rods ordered from Trend and get those on the way, and we won't be too far away from having a completed engine. So we got valve covers here, we got pulleys and brackets and an alternator, and I'm looking forward to cleaning up my parts area where I've got stuff strewn. But yeah, we'll get her done. All right, guys, hope you have a good day, and I should see you tomorrow.